I should have started that earlier, but it's okay. So now I'm going to make you host. You are host.
Okay. It worked. If you see Steve Zimmer on your screen, he is our judge for tonight's salon, and I want to say a big thank you to Steve for judging for us. A brief bio Steve gave me. I can't take credit for this. As a natural resource professional and Minnesota-based outdoor photographer, Steve has a lifelong relationship with landscapes and with photography. His passion is to apply an intimate knowledge of the natural environment, which he developed over a full career in the practice of forestry, to visually express the wonders of nature. The camera records more than the eye can see, bending time and light, magnifying detail, changing the perception of motion. Steve feels successful when his art helps a viewer see, feel, or understand some aspect of the environment they had not previously appreciated. I can, whoops. Cheat. Here's Steve's contact info, which I'm sure he would be happy to share with you. Or you can get it from me too, I guess, if you. So our assignment for this salon was still life. We're going to begin with the assignment images, and we will begin with the 7s. On images that are accepted, which is scoring 8 or above, I will also read the photographer's name. So we're going to start with the 7s of assignment, and it's a place to rest.
Okay, can I take just a minute to talk about judging?
Please do.
Yes, because I just want to know, people to know where I'm coming from on this whole process. And so I've been doing this about 3 years. Am I on the camera? Or do I have to speak to the microphone here? Is that going to be picking me up?
I think you're good.
Okay, yeah, you're okay on sound. I just want to, didn't know who I was talking to here. Everybody else can hear me. Anyway, a few years ago, I got signed up for the judging class that they have in our area, and there were 10 of us that were recruited and trained by some of the other senior judges over a several week period. And so it was just kind of the philosophy of judging, and how to do it, and what's important to include, and what do you consider. And then we practiced for a while, and so since then I've been doing probably 4 clubs a year for the last few years, and it's been fun. I really enjoy it. But I want to just go through a little list of things that are important to me, and how I approach a picture for this process. So at the top of my list is interest. Ultimately you have to have an interesting subject. Usually there's a decisive moment of some sort that people recognize as important. It's visually accessible, and it fits with a larger scene. So when you put all that together, you say, is this an interesting picture? I mean, it's very subjective, but I think most people know it when they see it. So, and we'll get into that, the why, in just a second here too. The other thing is there a story here? Does the image have something to say? So that means, is there a wow or an aha moment? Does it evoke emotion, thought, or challenge? And the idea that, because I saw a couple of leading lines that go to somewhere, well, that's technically, it could be a very nice picture, but is there anything interesting about that? And is there a story there? And that's where I think, the story has to come first, and then the photographer needs to get out of the way of that story and not have any distractions in the picture. That's kind of how I look at it too. So, and in your subject, is there interaction with the camera, with the surroundings, or others in the scene? There's one of my favorite other photography judges is Lane Kennedy, who's famous for many reasons about being an excellent photographer. But his example like in animal photography, is what he calls the standing cow. You can take a really beautiful picture of a cow just standing in the field. And if it's just sitting there with a blank look on its face and there's nothing happening around it, it's a very nice picture, but is there a story? So if that cow is interacting with its environment, with the camera, with the photographer, with another cow, or even expressing something of itself, that makes it more interesting. And so that's one of the things we look for too, is, is this an interesting, engaging subject? And then you get into clarity. Does the eye go where the artist intends? And that's where light management and depth of field management are really important. Is there a resting place for the eye, and then a journey of exploration? And is your subject the center of interest? There should be no distractions. And to the extent we can minimize them. I always admire the painters, because they can, somebody's not muted out there, I think.
Oh, and please mute your mic if you
Yeah.
haven't already done so.
So anyway, I'll kind of hurry through this. I think extra credit in all these, the awards come in. There's a lot of great pictures, and in this club, I had a very difficult time judging, because there are so many good pictures. And so what's the difference between a 7 and an 8, 9, 10 is oftentimes somebody just went that extra mile to make that subject a little more interesting, or they caught something that's a little more surprising than anybody else. Who's got pictures in here tonight?
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
It's like hooked on yours.
So, and all of that stuff, composition, cropping, lighting, depth of field, all of the rules of composition, that all comes into play in setting one photo aside as better than the other. And then finally, you get to the fatal flaws. And things like exposure problems of incorrect shutter speed, blown highlights, lost shadows, those are all pretty much, will rule a photo out for an acceptance. If the focus is off, if it's not sharp, if there's camera shake, and critical elements of the photo are not sharp, then that rules it out. Sometimes composition can do it, because the composition is just so awkward, it's hard to tell where the story is in the image. And then light, color, temperature, light direction is off in some part of the picture because it was artificially added or whatever, and it doesn't make sense. So, and then finally, processing, that's the big deal, because you get into Lightroom and Photoshop, and if you leave behind tracks that you manipulated this photo, and we all manipulate them. I mean, we take our photos into Lightroom and we process them, unless we let our cameras do it, which is perfectly acceptable, but it doesn't want to look, you don't want it to look like it was processed. And so over sharpening, evidence of art alterations, or, crunchy edges around things that shouldn't be crunchy, all of that stuff can detract from the story. And so that's kind of my thought process as I look at each picture, and hopefully it does the job of helping me to sort out the best ones from all the rest. And like I said, there's so many good pictures here, and I'm told to have to stick to 35% or so in the acceptance category. And so there are a number of them that either they just were a little less interesting to me, or that somebody else had a picture in the same category that was more interesting, or there was a flaw somewhere that kicked it out of the category. What I've been doing is scoring anything that is not an acceptance. I figure, unless it's just really awful and there's something terribly wrong with it, I give it 7s, because whether it's a 5, 6, or 7 doesn't matter. Either it's an award or an acceptance, or it's not. And just about every picture here that was not in the award category was also something that could be salvaged and made into something that would be award worthy with a little extra work. So I just don't bother to try to say, well, this is a 5 or a 6 or a 7, because I think every one of them is good enough to try salvaging. So with that, we'll start.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Sorry if I ran on too
No,
long.
I just had a momentary panic here because for some reason I'm not plugged in. I don't know if all that.
Oh, so you're not transmitting? Okay.
No, I got a warning from my computer.
Oh,
Plug it in,
okay, okay.
please. I thought it was. Okay. Anyway, so we'll go back to our beginning here. Assignment category, scores of 7. This is the first one, a place to rest.
Okay. And you know, this is a good example of a really cool photo. I like the simplicity of it and the composition and the angular flow through the photo. But there is one serious flaw, and that is the bottom end of one leg of that chair is cut off. And I did check, there's nowhere to go on that. Now, if the photographer left a little room in the camera and can put that back on there, and heck, even Photoshop could fix that, but it like taking portraits of people, you can't cut off fingers and toes. And when you have a picture of a piece of furniture like this, you can't cut off part of the foot. Otherwise, I liked it as a picture, and you know, exposure and all that. It has a little, I think, lightness of humor in it too. And but yeah, that has to be a 7.
Okay.
Okay.
Here is Christmas in Gold.
Christmas in Gold. Oh, and one other thing I'll say, I write down all my comments so I don't run on too long. Otherwise, I would tend to do that. But that also means that sometimes they can be brutally short, because I have to get through all these pictures in an evening. And so if anybody has questions and said, well, you just didn't say much and I didn't understand why my score was, feel free to get a hold of me afterwards. I'm open to discussion.
Okay.
Accepting email, going into a longer discussion, I have no problem with that.
All right. And if somebody reminds me, I'll put your contact info up again at the end.
Yeah, that's fine.
If I don't do it.
And so, okay, Christmas in Gold. Another great seasonal idea here. I liked all of the arrangement as a still life and all of that. I thought the little ring on the end of that one ornament was well positioned, and the ring and part of that cone are in focus. But I just felt that the photo needed a little more depth of field, and the ring itself and part of the cone seems like too small of a sample for me to serve as a compelling subject. And then the other issue is too, there's a lot of brightness behind the main 2 subjects here in the front. And I think if that light was controlled behind there further back in the picture, it would help hold more attention on the main part of the picture.
Okay, and thank you for using French words, people. This is Ballet Bleu in 1925. Thank God for Google Translate.
You know, I had to look that sign up and see what it said in English. And it's about the origins of a perfume company, and a particular kind of perfume that was originally made at this location. So it's a great story. And I think the sign and the perfume bottle under the dome are really the compelling part of this picture. The chairs and the pumpkin, not so much. I don't think they really support that story. They're attractive, but really the main point here, and I thought it was so interesting, was the upper half of the picture. And that little dome, there's a little brown bottle in a dome there that is an example of one of the original bottles of perfume that was made in that shop. And with the beautiful backdrop behind that, I think just that upper half of the picture would make a great picture. And I just don't think the 2 chairs and the pumpkin really have anything to say about what's, you know, the best part of that story. So I would say some judicious cropping, and that would be a much better picture.
Okay. Here is Speed Graphic Flash, Super Contro Press.
Well, I was impressed here that the photographer caught the flash in action. There's light coming out of that bulb. I don't know if it's a flash bulb, but it's definitely lit, and all the elements are sharp. The only thing as a still life is that I found the big bright box in the foreground to be distracting. I really think that camera itself has got a lot of interest. If you were a little closer to the subject, and that box was kind of hanging around in the background as something that you could say, oh, that's film. But to me, the story was more about the camera and the light. Obviously, the light was lit to draw attention to that camera and its assembly. And the film, I wish, was just a little bit more, less conspicuous. It would be a better picture.
All right, here is still number 2. Sorry about the zooming.
Okay, yeah, no, there are two photos by this same photographer. And I thought this was a nice still life, but I thought the elements were a bit high in the frame. It's like if the whole thing was a little bit lower in the frame, I want to see more of what's in there. And the background, whatever that the dried grasses are, or seed grains in the background, seem like they're kind of an incidental, almost cut off. And when you see the other picture, you'll know what I mean. And also, I didn't think in terms of what goes together in this picture that the tomatoes really looked like they were sandwich ready. And I think that would be a good story, is to have maybe sliced tomatoes that were ready to go in between a couple pieces of that bread. And again, when we see the other one, you'll see how well the same photographer did, using mostly the same materials, did a great job. Okay, next.
Next is yellow birch leaf.
And, at first I thought the uniformly black leaf background was pretty dull, but, at full size, it becomes a lot more interesting. And I think it's a really unusual shot, and I think it works. However, because it is kind of a one element picture, it got squeezed out by the competition. I really didn't find anything I didn't like about it, but I thought as a compelling subject, it just didn't stand up to some of the competition.
Okay. Now we'll go to the 8s. These are the acceptances, and I will read the photographer name. Here is bread, apple, cheese, and that's Dennis Kroll.
Okay, and you see what I mean. It's a better arrangement. The elements go well together. It's a good use of space, and the only comment I would have about it is that apple looks a little bit rough. It's not quite in focus, and I think it's this kind of black in the middle. If that was a little more appetizing, that would really bump this whole thing up a notch. But it's a nice still life, and so I scored it an 8 for being good in many ways.
Okay.
A good story.
And that's the end of the 8s. We're moving to the 9s now. And here is Fall Setting. And this is from Chaff Aiken.
In this one, I like it's some kind of an unusual still life at first glance, but I realized that the theme of the leaves is what's really holding the whole thing together. And once I saw that, I thought, oh, that's really a great idea. The leaf, even at the bottom of the candle stand, I mean, it just kind of, you go from one to the other, and it creates a flow and areas of interest that really fit. I thought the dark setting creates a mood that is accentuated by the lit, and that's a nice contrast. And I thought the flow, the light, the way the light is arranged, it's a nice circular flow, just going around from that candle all the way down and back up again. Very well done.
Next, here are the 10s. Here's Potted Stairway, and that's from Melissa Anderson.
And that's when I thought still life, I thought, really? Well, yeah, I guess it is, because it's all arrangements of these pots and flowers and very, very attractively arranged along a staircase that goes up to that beautiful golden wood door. And I think there's a lot to explore in the picture. It has a high amount of interest for me anyway. And, you know, following the steps up, you've got diagonals and corners and hand set stones. I mean, everything in that picture is worthy of some interest. And yet there's a nice flow that takes you through all of it so that you can stop along the way and see what is interesting to you. So an unusual setting for a still life, but I think it works.
Okay, well, that does it for our assignment category. Thank you, everybody who participated in that. We'll move on to our creative category. And again, we'll begin with the sevens. This is Empire Builder South or Dealer Southbound.
I thought this was a dynamic and well-composed shot of an oncoming train. The was that I don't feel like the blur effect is really adding anything to that. You know, if it had been used in a background to simulate panning, it would make more sense to me, but it just looks like everything in the shot except the train was blurred. And so I just, you know, I was trying to make sense of that. And I thought, it just, I know it's, you know, it's the creative category, but it still has to kind of tie everything together, and it didn't do that for me.
Here is Japanese Garden.
Okay, this is a nicely composed subject with, I mean, a shot with a clear subject and a lot of enhanced colors, but you know, this is the creative category. The only thing that I found a little off-putting was that the sky is so intense that it pulls my eye away from the intended subject. You know, the subject itself is that little garden house there, and I think you want to keep all the attention on that, and the sky is just extremely bright. There again, that's something that could be changed with further processing, and I think it would be a much better picture. It's a really nice composition.
Great. Next is St. Croix Shoreline.
Well, here's a good concept, I thought, that combines bands of colors with bare trees in the foreground. And again, looking, what is
Sorry, I'm trying to get the zoom to be appropriate.
Okay, and so and because it's creative, there's some extreme processing in there, which is all okay, except that I think something has to be in focus. And it looks like, you know, from the trunks of the trees, even to the finest parts, everything is just a little bit blurry. And I would really like some element in there to be kind of that my eye can grab onto. And if parts of it are out of focus, that works. But you know, when everything is treated the same, and you can see the kind of the blur around every tree trunk, I just find it a little more disturbing than probably what the photographer would have intended.
Okay. Moving on to the eights. Barn cats.
This is a laugh out. Oh, do you want
I forgot to say
name?
it's Kim Better. Betterton.
This was a laugh out loud moment for me, for the cleverness and the humor that went into this. And since it's in creative, I was kind of wondering if at least some of these cats were digitally inserted. And really, that's there.
They were there. Yeah, it was at a friend's barn, and they
Okay, well, it's a delightful story.
They cleaned them up, so I thought that was creative. I wasn't
Yeah,
quite sure.
well, there you go.
what
That's
was
fine.
all.
It's got a high cuteness factor, and you know, emotionally, it's a very attractive picture. And it gets an 8 only because of competitive pressure. But yeah, those are just, talk about a group of cats, and especially the one on the end that looks like it's smiling at the camera.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of the winner for me. And other than that, and a good story told with no distractions. Everything else fits, and it all builds on what's at the most important part of the picture, which is the cats. So great job.
Next are the nines. Hiding, and this is from Melissa Anderson.
Yeah, so this is a real piece of creative work. Gee, there's that bar in the bottom. Oh, there we go. Okay, we have
That's
to
why
see,
the-
we have to see the rabbit down in the
Yes,
corner.
we do.
Because that is, you know, I'd say this is a very painterly treatment with a good title. It's a real example of what creative can be in terms of photography. The only thing that kept it for me from a 10 is that the composition is a little off balance, and that I think the whole thing could be a little bit more to the right, because that space on the other side of the bear is not really adding much to the picture. And the little bunny is almost falling out of the picture, but then on the other hand, he's very well hidden in that little place on the edge. So I have to say, it still works. And so, yeah, nice picture.
Okay, and then here we have from Mike Schrun, Star Trail Aurora.
Well, and this is a good example of if the photographer told me this was a natural scene, it would be believable. And I think in creative, that's sometimes what you want is to say, well, some of these elements may have been composited from other pictures. I mean, and not that they were, but if they were, I would be surprised, because it's very well created, and it's and well managed throughout the whole process. The only little distraction for me that I have to mention is that the star trails in the water show gaps from the multiple exposures that made up the whole shot. And I know that when you are processing, I do night photography myself, you're processing these in the sky part, the processing will actually kind of fill in those gaps for you, that if you're using multiple shots to make your star trails. But for some reason, there were kind of dots down there, and it was just enough to say, okay, well, it's not perfect, but it's still very nice. And, you know, all of the colors and light and the foreground and all that really works. So nicely done.
And finally, our 10, City of Screws from Michael Waterman.
All right, so this was another laugh out loud moment when I realized what I was looking at. And I think, you know, where do these ideas come from? I don't know, but as a creative entry, it is really clever, and especially with that background sky with the moon in front of the clouds. I mean, who could do that? You know, they never. Obvious evidence that it is a fine creation, but the colors, the sky. I mean, and notice how the colors of the moon and the sky are really complementary to all of that silver and black in the metal in the foreground. So I just think it's a very fun idea that was very well executed, and I really enjoyed this one.
Congratulations. Okay, moving on to nature now. We are going to start, as usual, with the 7s, and our first one is Alaska Shoreline.
Okay, here is a sea stack that looks very interesting at first glance. When you see it, I think, wow, that's, you know, I'd like to see a little more of that. But one of the issues here is that it is visibly unsharp, and I don't mean by pixel peeping. If I just, because I put these on a computer screen, so I'm just sat at normal distance and I'm not zooming or anything, and it was not sharp enough, I thought. And, you know, if the other thing is that it's pretty pinched in the frame. I think, you know, something that big needs a little room around it. And so if it had any room on the sides, a little breathing room would be a big improvement. I don't know if you've got any material in the frame, or if there was something out there that had to be cut off, but when it's cut off right on the edge, it's an imposing piece of rock, but that alone, you know, sometimes the setting around it gives you an idea of just how big and powerful it is, and that's more or less missing from here.
Okay. This is coastal sea stacks.
Well, another impressive object that is up close. I'm sure that it is even more impressive the closer you get to it. But to make it more impressive in 2 dimensions, you know, we keep thinking when we're out in the field looking at these things and, you know, our mind zooms in on it, you think, wow, that's really cool. You put it into a picture, and it's like, well, where did all that coolness go? Well, because it needs energy, I think. And so these kinds of photos, especially of these features, are often taken under different conditions. And I know you're there when you're there. I do this when I'm traveling too. You do the best you can in the situation you're with. But I think, you know, wet sand, a calm sea, and a pleasant sky, there's not a whole lot of energy going on there. And then I was also think that the driftwood in the foreground, I mean, it's good to have a foreground object, but you kind of want that thing to be pointing you in the direction of where you're going to be looking. And it's just kind of sitting there. I don't think it's really serving the picture in the way that it could if it was. I mean, not to say that you can go over there and pick it up, but maybe you could leave it out. And so I know it's not often possible, but man, if you had a chance to return here at high tide and evening light, this would be a whole different picture. It would be amazing. But you know, midday, you do what you can. I do it all the time, like I said. But there's a difference between making a fine tourism picture and an acceptance for a competitive picture. And you know, so when we're talking competition, there's a lot of good pictures that just are this close. So
Okay. Next we have frog on pads.
and you know, I felt like this should have been a higher score, but I think it can be with just a little bit of work. And that's why sometimes if I give it a 7, it doesn't mean I thought it was not a good picture, but I think the photographer has another chance to make a couple of changes and re-enter it at another salon, and it would do very well. So I think it's a nice, sharp, close up an attractive frog. The natural light is quite bright, and I think it would help if the harsh light on the side of the frog, the bright side of the frog, was darkened just a little bit. And then that leaf above the frog is almost so bright that it's pulling attention away from the frog. The stuff on the sides and around in the front is kind of, that's the area where you're looking, but that leaf on the top just looked rather intrusive to me. But I think with a little, like I said, a little burning and dodging there, that would easily be an award picture.
Okay. Here is lunchtime.
Well, this is a great example of catching an animal going about its day, and that's really the best way to catch wildlife. I think when they're engaged in their lives, and you catch them in a moment where they don't even know you're there. The only thing I thought that could be improved here is that by controlling the bright background and that one bright branch that's sticking out in front, those are the kind of distractions that would really put more attention on the chipmunk and or the red squirrel, whatever it is there. And there again, it would be a much better picture with just a little light management. So, but nice capture and well photographed.
Okay. Here is peaceful morning.
Yeah, another tough call. This is truly a peaceful scene. That's a great title, and the swans are very nicely lit. I think in a perfect world, the beak of one swan might not be touching the neck of the other. They talk about mergers, you know, sometimes a little bit of space somewhere. Now they are connected down below, but that maybe is a good reason why they don't have to be connected at the top too. some people would say, well, that's so that you know they're together, but on the other hand, like I say, they're close enough in the bodies that, and maybe just a split second earlier or later, you would have gotten that separation. But at any rate, it's still a nice photo. And if it were my photo, though, the only thing I would do and still consider it a nice photo is to darken that background a little bit. Those bright grasses, although that's lovely golden light on them, they are pulling away from the subject, which are these two swans. So, but nicely photographed.
Here is Sandhills at Cracks.
Well, this is certainly a good sharp silhouette of cranes coming in for the night. I've been up there and photographed these birds and tried to photograph them many times. And that's a great time of day to be there. And it's nice to catch 3 of them coming in like that, so close. Technically, I think the area of the sun is the sky, it looks blown out to me. And you know, in the award category or the acceptance category, that's kind of a no-no. If there's any way of working around that, that would be good to be able to do. Also, I think the black at the bottom and the amount of sky that's there would I don't know, it's a great scene, but you know that when it's completely black at the bottom, how much of it do you really need? I considered if you took a look at it as maybe a 2-to-1 crop and removed some of the black at the bottom and some of that sky, those birds really become the center of attraction. Then it might matter less what the sun looks like, but a nice moment, and those birds really are sharp.
Here is Sunset Frog.
Well, another nice frog capture, and again, the sunlit side is a bit harsh, but I think what got me on this one is that I can't even make it out really. There's stuff behind that frog that is possibly another frog or something else, but it adds a little visual confusion for me. I'm not sure what I'm looking at back there. And you know, I might say, well, then don't look at it. But you know, it pulls me like, well, what is that? What is it? I'm looking and I can't make it out. So I just felt there was just enough confusion in there that, despite that being a very nice picture of a close-up of a frog, it's a little bit short of the acceptance category. And again, given the competition, I won't say that every time, but that's really the driver sometimes.
Walking on Thin Ice.
Well, I gotta say, a polar bear strolling by is a rare and special moment. And photographic story, though, is always better when the subject is engaged somehow, either by interacting with its environment or with another bear, or even looking at the photographer, although I don't know you'd want this one looking at you, but unless you were shooting from a long ways away. And it's a great documentary photo. I mean, you've got a nice, sharp, clear picture of a bear. Just maybe, again, more of a good documentary shot that is, you know, well, it's going to hold up well over time, but not quite into the acceptance category.
Okay. Moving on into the acceptances, we will start with Under Her Wing from Carl Wagoner.
Well, obviously a relatively rare photo. I know that these are hard to get, a balloon and a chick. Usually only the most dedicated loon watchers get photos like this. The birds are sharp and active, and that's always a plus. The loon with even though the loon with the mouth open, you know, obviously having something to say and maybe making sounds. And the chick is obviously right under her attention. That kind of detail is always a plus. The only thing I would suggest, I guess, if it was my picture, I'd do a little selective darkening of the busy background, because that's really pretty bright and complex. If it was a little bit subdued, it would put more attention on that. Well, not that it needs much more, because it's very large in the frame, so a great picture overall.
Going right to score 9, we will have Hummer in the Garden from Mary Ann Jerks.
Well, this is a super photo of a hummingbird with their with the beak buried so deep in that flower. I thought that was just a little bit comical, because he was really reaching down in there, and sometimes they're a little more delicate than that, but that flower is a long flower too. So I thought of great sharpness, and the subject engaged with its environment, and the plant that there's only one flower there, so that makes a great point of interest too. And the background is nicely subdued, and actually even some complementary colors back there that kind of offset that bird with the pink colors. And so it just kind of all adds to the attractiveness of the picture, and keeping attention on that compelling little bird.
Okay, next we have, lost my place, Resplendent Quetzal, and that is also from Mary Ann Jerks.
Well, this is definitely a beautiful exotic bird, which on its own could say they have a photogenic advantage over our domestic species. So when people travel and see these exotic birds, I think, well, that's unfair. Their birds are so much better looking than ours, to start with. But what makes this photo and sets it apart so much is that wonderfully complex perch. Now that's not just a stick like all of our Minnesota birds are sitting on. That's a little world of itself to explore. And I thought that was really a nice addition to this. And the bird with its mouth open, it's not just sitting there, it's calling or talking or making some sort of action that kind of tells you that it's engaged.
And on to the tons. There's 2 tons of fury, and this is from David Heemsberg.
Well, this is a case where motion blur can be excused because this is what adds energy to the photo. The fact that there is a fair amount of motion blur. And what you have though is you got one bison's eye with a catch light in it, and it's passably sharp, which is really all you need out of the animals to know that this was a moment that was frozen. And you notice the dirt flying off the back of that bull because of the impact. I mean, just the impact was knocking dust out of that bull's hide. And both animals are filling the frame. I mean, it could not be a more decisive moment. And so this is truly an outstanding photo. Probably not a subject that people will be able to capture very often, because they don't get into these kind of fights often. But when they do, and you're in the right place, to be in a position like this where you really get a good look and up close, and I mean up close photographically speaking. I'm sure they weren't up close, but if you're out there with a 400 or 500 millimeter lens, you can get this close and you're still at a safe distance. So what a great picture though.
Yeah. And here is Upper Bond Falls. This is from Steve Botcher.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, one of the things that when you look at a lot of pictures, and I'm looking at pictures all the time, other people's pictures, and not just because I'm doing this, but just online and looking at the photographer Facebook pages and all that, I see a lot of pictures of this falls, and And my thing, and one of my favorite subjects is Split Rock Lighthouse. And so when you're taking a picture of a popular spot, I think it is really important to make it an exceptional picture. And that's the one thing some people will dismiss, oh, just another picture of that fall, that Wisconsin Bond Falls, you know. And no, it's not. That this is exceptional for a number of reasons. And so then it's not a cliche. It's just a magical moment that was caught, and you can still get those even at the most popular spots. That's why I think they're popular. And certainly this is right up at the top of what I've seen from this location. And even if I'd never seen one, it would still be a great photo. But the yellow leaves in the foreground, kind of giving a nice entry point into the picture. And then from there's a very well-defined visual flow that goes all the way in and all the way up the stream. And motion blur can be tricky. And I think here, what I like about it is that the most prominent falls are still showing definition between the streams. You have some very nice in focus, sharp streaks of water, and it's also mixed in with stuff that is totally blurred, because I think that's where the energy is. That's adding energy. That water is moving faster, and you know, splashing around more, and so you've got that blend. And I just think it's a good capture of the mood of the falls and what's going on there. It kind of brings the whole thing alive to have, you know, different kinds of blur in the same picture. So, you know, and the light, by the way, is perfect too. These waterfalls can blow out so easily if the light is just a little too bright. You know, everything washes out. So just very well done all the way around.
Okay, that does it for the nature category. Steve, did you want to take a break?
I don't need a break, but if anybody else wants, I believe it. Okay, all right.
You take your 10 and go home.
Yeah.
Remember to leave your name tag.
How am I doing on time?
We're fine.
Okay.
We can go another hour if we have to. I don't think it'll
Well, I hope
take
not.
place that. Do you have enough water there?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
fine. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks.
Our next category then is cell phone. And we will start with the 7s. Starting with Lake Cabin.
Okay, now there are two photos of the same scene.
I think that was my error.
Oh,
Did you intend to?
did I wait?
Did you intend to send two?
I don't.
Or did you send one and then I couldn't remember. We had some problems.
I guess something on.
Okay, I'm just going to comment on each of them because
No, I think that's fine.
they're nice photos, but for different reasons, I think each one could benefit from some additional processing that would make them into much better photos. I like them in the curved driveway going up, the tracks going up to there, and the cabin itself. It's all very nice scene. I think this. I mean, the other one.
You want to see the other one right away?
You want
So
to
that's
just
what you're
let's
talking
compare.
about.
Let's get so they're right next to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the other one.
So there's
Okay, that's fine.
yeah. So there's the scene. I think as just, you know, without any work done on it, and it's black and white, and the sky is just flat gray, which, you know, is always a challenge. I think even if there was a gradient, what do you call it, linear gradient put on that sky to kind of bring the light level down so that at least the snow is brighter than the sky, and you have some division of you know, space in the picture would be an improvement. But then going back to the other one, I would say that looks like the first picture, but with the sky replacement, or in a different sky anyway, from the exact same position. And, you know, the cabin side of the photo is the subject cabin is kind of darker, so there's light coming from the sun, but then the other side is kind of in the shadows, and I think the sun is drawing attention away from what I would consider the payoff, is because you got that nice curved line going right up to the cabin. That's kind of where you want to land. And so if that cabin was even brighter and the sky was brighter on that side, I think it would be a much more balanced picture. But nice raw material to work there with. I think it could be worked into something definitely a notch higher than what it is at right now.
Okay, here is Machu Picchu.
Yeah, and now there is a rare photo, because you got that all the way out? Okay, yeah, let's see everything down to
It's
the
a
bottom.
little hard to get exact. How's that?
Well, whatever, make sure you show everything right down to the bottom. That's kind of, there you go. Now you've got
All right, so
everything.
don't look at this.
Oh, that comes up if you
Yeah, I
get,
don't
oh my
want it
gosh,
to.
okay. Well, anyway, I mean, this
We're
is
solving it.
a very striking view of a historic site. I just read today that they're gonna start allowing more people in there because it's been so over. I mean, it's been so hard to get a reservation to even go up there because they had cut way back for a while, and especially during COVID. Now they finally opened it up again. And up in the mountains, what is this, 15,000 feet or something like that? The weather is always a big part of the story, and so these dramatic clouds indicate that. But what I couldn't help noticing was that the bottom edge cuts off part of the historic site. And I think, if you're standing on a cliff or a cliff edge or something, and that's all you can see, I think it would be best to show some of that cliff edge so that it doesn't look like an arbitrary cutoff. Because it just looks like cut off. And I know there's more there that is more closer and more interesting, and you wouldn't really want to sacrifice that to show more clouds. So I think the composition just left me wanting to see a little bit more of the site, or at least to understand why I couldn't see more of the site. And there, like I say, if there's a cliff edge there that you're looking down on, just put a little edge of that cliff in the picture to make it clear that this is, what everybody sees. Okay.
Okay. This is Molly.
Molly, a very endearing picture of the dog that is sharp and well exposed, and there's a nice catchlight in the eye. And I think the only issue I had with it was that the foreground fabric on the couch there is very bright, and then that fabric pillow has a very busy edge. And I just think when you're talking about portraits, even with pets, you really want the setting to complement the subject and not compete with it. And I think there's just a little competition there that you could maybe even crop that white out of there, even would be better. But you want to keep all the attention on the subject.
Here is Rusty Patched Bumblebee.
And this is a very nicely composed scene. It's hard to believe you could take a picture like this with a phone, but not really, as I have a phone that'll probably take a picture this good too. The only issue here was that the bee was slightly soft, and I think that's an issue that I have with my phone too, is that sometimes I tap on the subject and the phone grabs something that's just a little bit nearby, and what it did here was it grabbed that flower stalk there and passed by the bee, so that the bee itself is slightly soft. Otherwise, if that bee was sharper, it would have easily been an acceptance, because it's a wonderful, wonderfully composed picture.
Here is the Gunflint Trail.
Yeah, another hard to believe it's a phone type picture. I like the scene and the setting, and However, this one does reveal one of the shortcomings of phone cameras, which is a more limited dynamic range than with a larger sensor. And when you have fewer pixels to contain the detail in a busy large scene, you're going to suffer some resolution 2 problems, like the flowers in the foreground. You're not going to have as much detail in them as you might like. But I think the only technical issue here would be that the brightest clouds appear blown out. And, you know, in this case, I'd say it can help to use manual exposure on the phone. In mine anyway, it's a Samsung. You can tap on the screen and slide your finger and it'll actually lower the exposure and get it down to where the highlights are under control, because you cannot recover blown out highlights. Once they're gone, they're gone. And it's a lot easier to pull up some light from the shadows and fill in if it turns out to be a little dark. But the phones are amazing, and this is a very nice picture. But with that one cloud with the blown out sky, we got to keep it out of the acceptance category.
Hey, here's Truck Cemetery.
Okay, and you know, this was a good title for what we have here. I think the title says exactly what the subject is, but I don't think the trucks have as much presence in the photo as they could have, given that they're the subject of the photo. So I think maybe moving in closer and emphasizing that line of trucks at the expense of some of that foreground grass, which adding much to the picture, and even some of that sunset sky up towards the top there. It can be, you know, you could get by without some of that and still get up close enough to these trucks. And actually what I would imagine, if you ever go back there, is get right in among those trucks, and sunset or no, get some detail, because that's obviously a very interesting place. I'll bet you could find a lot of cool stuff just walking around in there, and, you know, put that up against the background. But you know, it states what the situation is, a truck graveyard or whatever, but cemetery, but they're not the most prominent thing in the picture. And that would be nice to have more of that.
On to the eights. We'll start with Rainbow from Sugar Dome Mountain from Steve Potter.
Yeah, that's you know, phones do struggle with this much detail for the limited pictures they have, but in this case, the photographer made the best of the situation by thoughtfully composing to include some trees in the foreground, which, you know, do provide some detail, and they're large enough to really recognize that you've got a sharp picture. And the rainbow is a nice bonus. It could have, you know, it could be a little brighter, a little cleaner, sure, but you know, that's a great scene and it's well done. And I think and I wouldn't say for a phone, it's just a nice picture, and so I thought it was worthy of the acceptance.
Here is Summer at the Houghton, Michigan Bridge from Nick Richards. Direction. Houghton.
Yeah, so this is an example, I think, of how the photographer raised a tourist picture above the usual tourist snapshot level by taking the time to find and include an interesting foreground. You know, this little garden of flowers in here gives you a nice entry point into the scene, and it shows you something more than the bridge, but yet the bridge is still large enough in the frame to be impressive. And I guess I call this a good example of intentional photography. You know, sometimes we see these scenes and we just raise our camera and say, there, I took a picture of the bridge. But, you know, somebody took the time to walk around and say, how can I make this more interesting? And that would be a success right there.
Our next category is pictorial. Starting with the sevens. Boat Harbor, Nice, France.
Okay, you know, here I really liked the vivid red and yellow of the two subject boats. This could easily be bumped up a notch or two with some light management and cropping. It's a very busy picture, and the boats that are obviously the most attractive and right up front are competing with a whole bunch of other stuff for some attention. So I think even just simply doing a little cropping, I mean, that sky in the background really isn't that great. I mean, it's not really serving to tell you anything about the boats. And I think even cropping down to eliminate some of that sky or putting a radial filter over the two boats and brightening them a little to set them apart. Also, cropping from the top corners would keep the viewer's eye in the scene and on the subjects. And I got to issue a warning here. If you do that and resubmit it, most judges won't give an acceptance to anything that has an even number of objects in it, because it's one of those rules that, and this is part of one of the things that kind of rankles me, is you got to have 3 or 5 or 7. You can't have 2 or 4 or 6, or there's something wrong with that. But when you come in a scene like this, those two boats are just crying for attention. There's only 2 of them. I would take the picture too, and to heck with it. but you want all the attention to be on there, and you know, getting rid of some of that busyness. That's really an interesting picture.
Okay. Next is Cologne Cityscape.
Well, and there's the famous Cologne Cathedral, and there's no doubt what that subject is, and it really looks great with lights on in the blue hour. The whole city is lit up there, and I know it's an artistic choice here, but personally, I don't care for such a heavy treatment on the sky. I think with all of the golden warm light underneath on the ground, that sky presents an opportunity to really lighten up the scene a little bit. And I think lightening up the sky and you know, that dense blue is just kind of overwhelming, and maybe cropping out some of the water too, which is it's good to have there, but you know, how much of it do you need? I think just between that, changing the light around and judicious cropping, this would definitely be a notch or 2 higher. Very nicely done. I mean, it's sharp and nicely composed in every other way.
Here's Glacial Tour.
Yeah, and this is interesting. I would call it a competent tourism photo that illustrates what you might see if you go to this place. But I couldn't find a subject or action that was compelling enough to gain an acceptance. You know, it's a kind of a quiet, calm scene, and no, there's nobody like falling in the water, or no fish jumping out, or whales or anything. So it's a good picture, but just below the acceptance level because of the nature of the subject.
Okay. Kodak number 4A.
Well, more classic cameras. Yes, we have a nicely made photo of a classic camera. However, it is severely cropped and maybe necessary to eliminate some nearby distractions, but you know, it leaves the object kind of cramped in the frame. And it also reveals, when it's cramped in the frame like that, if it is not perfectly symmetrical, which if you look on the right side, it's just a little bit narrower at the top on that board than it is at the bottom. And you know, I know that's getting very picky, but like I say, there's a lot of competition here, so I got to pick on something sometimes. But I feel it's important in this situation just because everything is so close to the edge. If there's any way to have a little more space around that camera, I think I would use it, and it would give the camera, this thing, subject, a little more room to breathe. If you can get your mind around that concept, I kind of use that like it's possible, but you know, I just think it's nice to have a little more relaxed view.
Next is night harvest.
Well, I know what corn harvesters are, so I recognize this right away. And I think it's a great story, and it was a good effort to get out and capture this scene where you probably somebody in the family, or you might be from a family that does this, and it's long, hard work. Just when they're harvesting the corn, they're going all night long and all day long to get it before the next rain comes. And so if you know all of this about corn harvesting, you can look at that and your mind will really fill in the blanks. But as a photo story, I think a little more detail is needed. And I would say maybe a little brighter on the corn and a little closer to at least one of the machines so you can see the workings of it. And I mean, they're fascinating close up with the chute and the auger, the corn getting chopped up or brought in, and then when the truck comes, they're emptying it into the truck, and there's a lot going on. And so, how much of the night sky do you need to tell you that it's night? And so, I mean, you could still tell that story that these harvesters are out working at night and still get close enough to the harvester to really give people a close-up look of what it is that's going on here. Because like I say, if you don't know what it is, you won't be able to figure it out by the amount of detail you can see here.
Here's old boats.
Okay, this is one of 3 boats that were submitted by this photographer. And there was one that I really, really liked, and the other 2 were, yeah, okay, they were good pictures, but this is one that didn't quite make the cut compared to the other 2, or to the best image, I thought, from this one photographer. It's a nicely made photograph. It's an interesting subject. There's definitely a story here. And just because of the constraints on acceptances, I chose another one as my favorite.
And here is painting lessons.
Now, I really like the moment portrayed here. It's obviously what's going on, and I think it was a very special moment to capture that. And the boy has the brush in his hand. I mean, he's not just watching what I'll presume is his dad painting, but it could be. It didn't have to be, but at any rate, yeah, that. And if you look at that alone, it's a very compelling photo. But I think it needs a little more attention directed to those subjects. And I think it can be done with this one by applying a little light management and maybe some cropping. Now, in the picture, if you look at the full picture, there's that lighthouse, there's blue sky above the lighthouse. And, sometimes when you're trying to keep the eye down on the subject, you actually want to cut off part of the top of that lighthouse to keep the eye from escaping up into the sky and keep it on the subject. I mean, that's just, a composition trick, I guess you'd call it. And, the lighthouse and the sky are actually brighter than the subjects. And so in the interests of keeping more attention on the subjects, which are, it's a very cool moment there, doing a little cropping and a little light management on the bright stuff out in front of the subjects would really strengthen the composition story.
Red Wing Riverfront.
A very nicely composed aerial view, and obviously the large cruise boat there is the main attraction, and that's nicely positioned in the frame to let the eye go right to it. This is not a heavy sky day, but my first impression was that it looks heavy. I think the clouds should show some bright white, and they're really not. I mean, they're on the brighter side, but I think the whole sky could be lifted a little bit by lightning. Maybe, I don't know if there was dehaze that was applied sometimes can do that. It kind of turns it kind of a deeper blue. What I sometimes do is I'll just back off on the saturation of the blue and kind of lighten it. And it just kind of lifts the whole mood, because this is one of those kind of bright, breezy days, I think, and it looks a little heavy. But other than that, it's a great picture and definitely potential to go up a notch or two with a little further light management, I guess I'll call it.
Reminiscing.
Now, this is a nice natural pose, and a mood is expressed. The reminiscing mood is expressed on the model's face. It's a good title. And the only thing and here again, if you can see the whole picture, there's a lot of distractions on the floor. It's kind of dark down there, but well, we're not going to be able to see that. But there were some leaves and some things kind of laying around on the floor that were bright enough visual distractions that I felt that could be taken care of. And also that plant, there's just a few leaves from a plant sticking into the picture, and that they're really not needed. Maybe some slight cropping and some spotting would really make that into a better picture. I certainly don't mind the high key background. That's, even though that's technically blown out, that's a kind of a legitimate portrait technique, and a lot of people are using it, and I don't think it takes away anything from the subject, especially because you've got that wrought iron fence behind the subject that kind of blocks the, tells you, well, this is the end of the picture right here. You know, don't look beyond that.
Okay. Here is Scarista Beach.
I like the long exposure and the composition here, the placement of that of the prominent mountain or the prominent hill, and it comes right down to a bright spot on the shore that is very well positioned in the frame. And but I think even the most scenic landscapes need some help to guide the viewer's eye. And I guess my first thought was, with the light shining on that bright spot over there, you could really brighten that up a little bit, and it'd jump your eye across the water, and you can take a look at the rest of those hills. And actually, the hills, the fog, it's not really fog. I think it's just heavy sea at high humidity. It's due to the time of day. It's pretty dense. I think if there's a way to even, you know, apply a little dehaze or something to bring those mountains forward a little bit, make them a little more prominent without losing any of the sky, you'd have a really nice scene to look at and a nice bright spot to kind of lift the whole mood of the picture. And really a very minor change would really bump this up, I think.
Here is Tug David Andrews.
Okay, now here's the second one by the same photographer. And I think here that it's just that the subject is much smaller in the frame, and the expanse of weedy rocks in the foreground really, I don't know, they're not adding much to it. I mean, how much of that do you need? You really want to look at the boat if that's the name of your subject. And it's the light isn't helping this one either. It's pretty flat and heavy fog. And not to say that can't work, but I think in this condition, this particular photo, it isn't working for me anyway.
Twilight River Road 2.
Boy, I really liked the light and the exposure in this, and I think the car with the starburst headlights is very interesting. And you know, the composition is okay, but a line straight up the middle like this needs a pretty strong subject as a payoff, and I don't think the car headlights are quite up to the task. But the sky is beautiful, And but the main distraction here would be that the road shows some spots. It could be sensor dust or something else, but there are dark spots in the road that can just be cleaned up. And I think to get rid of those distractions first would help. And it is, the side of the road, the trees are awfully dark. And I know it's because it's after sunset, but yeah, I guess because it's more or less a straight road that, and even though it is hilly, it needs, the car is it's interesting, but it didn't quite pull it all together for me.
Here is Winding Road.
Talk about popular spot.
Sorry.
Oops. Talk about popular spots. This is, I think, the most famous winding road in the Lake States. Does everybody know where this is? Door County? And I've never been there, but I feel like I have because I've seen this picture so many times. And so, like I was saying, you're going to take a picture of a popular spot. It has to be an exceptional picture. And this is, I think the material is there, but I think the road is so bright that it is distracting to me. And so with all those beautiful trees, I think a darker road winding through there would really it would just change the whole mood of the picture. And I mean, you'd try it and find out, maybe I'm wrong, but I really think there's a lot of potential here. So I gave it a 7 because I think you should try that, try something, and because there just isn't enough detail in the road, and it feels just overly bright. But great composition, and man, you're not going to find trees like that for very many days out of the year. So the timing was perfect.
On to the 8s. We'll start with a sorcerer sorcering from Fred Sabatka.
Yeah, let's see, where did I have? I had somehow I had that different position. I just need to find where oh, here we go. Yeah, it's just definitely a dramatic moment. And, if this was captured at a performance versus being set up by the photographer as a portrait, well, you don't get to control the light, so I understand that. But just a little light on the front of the figure to reveal a hint of detail and maybe add some intrigue, that blacked out face. If there was just a little, I know there's a very small amount of detail in there, but if there was just a little bit more to actually increase the mystery of the whole thing, I think it would make a big difference. But nevertheless, a very dramatic moment, and certainly well presented here.
Here is Red Fox Looking at You from Melissa Anderson.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, the fox isn't quite looking at me, I don't think. I think he's looking at lunch. But still, a very nice catch of a wild animal interacting with its environment, and that beautiful bushy tail is hanging right down on the side, actually presenting even more of why this is a beautiful animal. And so, yeah, nicely done.
Scene from a Wedding from Fred Sabatka.
Well, there's a lot of fun going on. It's a well-caught moment. I guess you only get one chance to take this picture, don't you? And so everyone's attention is on the dove, almost. The kids in the foreground really don't care what's going on, but the one kid is kind of bright, and I think you know, it's an acceptance, but it could go even a little bit higher if the kids in the foreground were just darkened a little bit. I mean, you can bring those levels down, mask them, and brush in some lower level lights, so they're not eye catching, because they are that one kid in the kind of the pinkish hoodie is kind of competing for some attention visually with everybody behind them. That's really part of the action.
On to the nines. We'll start with beach at sunset.
Well,
Oh,
this
I'm
is
sorry, from Mary Ann Jerks, excuse me.
okay. Now there's an example of how different conditions at a very similar spot can make a dramatic difference in what you get for a picture. And this is really an example of how layers of interest, again, because you're looking through at many layers of cliffs here that go off through into the distance. And there's energy here, there's motion, the more waves, the water coming up onto the shore, reflecting the sunlight. And it all brings a lot of energy and interest and beauty into the picture that the middle of the day just can't give you, unless it's the middle of a storm or something. But, you know, this is a good example of the difference just a few hours can make in this environment.
Next is Consumed by the Sea.
Yeah, now here's the boat picture. That was my favorite. I saw that. And of the 3 photos submitted by this member, this is certainly the most interesting to me. And I would just call it the last thing you see before it's nothing at all. And I thought that this was well seen. It might be, from the looks of this, it might be only visible at low tide. And so, you know, you're there at the right time and caught that and presented it very well. It's right up in front, and even though it's still at an angle and you've got enough stuff going on in the back, you've got other things to look at, but very well presented frame.
And that's from J. Olson Goody. Next we have Raccoon in a Tree from Michael Waterman.
Well, there you go. He's not sure where you are, but he knows there's somebody out there that he should be looking for. I think it's a nicely captured raccoon in the side light, you know, that soft side light, that's more the end of daylight that just kind of highlights the edge and shows how all those the fur, the little hairs sticking out, and each one is illuminated. Really adds interest and shape and dimension to the raccoon all the way down the tail too. And its body language suggests vigilance to me. I mean, he's up in the tree, he's probably going to try to eat some of those berries, but they're never really relaxed. And so you get that feeling, and I think that's an important part of the picture too, is having captured that moment of vigilance. And so just very well done all the way around.
Next, the tens. Hungry Egret Chicks from Mary Ann Jerks.
Wow, it's still a wow. An exceptional and intimate view into the lives of this egret family. The position of the parent, you know, you catch that parent arching over the chicks in a kind of a protective formation. I think the composition is about flawless, and everything is sharp, and even the nest is visible because that's their home. And so just a beautiful picture, well done.
And finally, we have Lake Fall from Chap Aiken.
Well, this is an example of how photographing random forest scenes is a lot harder than it looks. Because, I mean, this is a very rare scene. I mean, I've walked around trying to imagine running into something like this someday, but this colorful tree provides a very attractive point of entrance and interest, and against this backdrop of gray trees, but yet there's color throughout the picture. You go back in the forest and there's still trees back in there that are adding interest and color as deep as you can see into the forest. And I thought it was also very good of the photographer to put a tree on either side to kind of let you know these are the edges of the picture. Just in from the edge, there's trees that are positioned that kind of mark the edges so that it's not running off and out of the frame. Keeps your eye in to where the color is, and then there's that spot that into the forest that kind of gives you a pathway in to go and explore all those other colors. Just, you know, a very nice composition, very effective, great story.
All right, well, that's all we have for tonight.
Oh, that's it.
Thanks
Wow.
again,
Okay,
Steve.
well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Go back to your contact info. Does anybody have any questions or comments or?
Blanks.
I didn't say complete.
I'll take them.
Do you think that how much post-processing was happening in that last image?
I'm sorry, what?
How much post-processing do you think was happening?
In that
In
last
that
image?
last- Yeah.
Well, I think that nothing ordinary.
No, I was,
Yeah.
fine, but
Well, I mean, I think if, you know what, the same thing, I think that most people who are using, I don't think it was anything beyond Lightroom. But no, I mean, I'm just saying, how much was in there, normal, it looked normal to me. And I think the colors were a little bit, maybe luminance was boosted a little bit. But I think that's within the realm of artistic,
yeah,
what would you call it?
yeah, it was really
Discretion.
well done.
Yeah, I mean, and because, and sometimes they can be that brilliant, so I'm never, you know, as the so-called judge here, I'm not gonna say how I think somebody got to where they are, because I could be dead wrong, and it could be a completely natural scene. And, you know, just like with the night sky picture, I look at it and say, this could have been all natural, but if it wasn't, it's very well done. And I think we would say the same thing for this.
Yeah.
And especially on a cloud, that last one was a cloudy day. And sometimes with the cloudy day, those colors really pop certain times of the year. So, but if it was me and I had that picture, yeah, I would definitely bring up the lumens on some of those oranges and reds just to make sure that, you know, they stay front and center.
Well, thanks again. Does anybody who is attending on Zoom have any comments or questions? Speak now.
Yes, what about the scavenger hunt?
Let's see, scavenger hunt was managed by Terry. And I don't recall if she put them on the website or not. But I will check.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything.
Okay, who's asking?
Chappie.
It's Chappie Aiken.
Okay. I will check.
Thank you.
Good question.
Next deadline, January 17th.
I think we're gonna call it a night. Next year, yes.
Oh, do I see?
Next year already.
I got it.
Got that already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna end the Zoom call.